know, maybe someone here doesn't know me. I'm Jo Clemens. I'm the one who sends you all those emails from the Center for Teaching and Learning. It's good to see all of you. If you don't know me, please come introduce yourself. I like to know everybody that I can. Tara Gray is here. She flew in actually a few days ago because she loves San Diego so much. She lives in New Mexico. We have become good friends over the years, and she is a person in faculty development that I have been smart enough to follow. I have cyber stalked her online and asked her advice. She's been very gracious to me. But I do want to read an introduction about her just so that you know just how amazing she is, that we can trust what she has to say. She serves as an associate professor of criminal justice at the Teaching Academy at New Mexico State, and is the founding director of the Teaching Academy there, which is an amazing center, Center for Teaching and Learning. She has her PhD in economics from Oklahoma State, a bachelor's of philosophy from Southwestern in Kansas, and she went to the United States Naval Academy. Is that true?
2 years.
2 years. She's an award-winning teacher, which is why they got her into faculty development. She's been honored at New Mexico State and nationally with 10 awards for teaching or service. She's a prolific scholar, author, and presenter, and she's published 3 books, one of them being published in Flourish, and over 25 book chapters in both faculty development and criminal justice. She's presented faculty development workshops to well over 10,000 participants, so she may up that number after today. More than 120 colleges, and she's been here maybe 3 or 4 times in the past, in 35 states and internationally in several countries. I also want to mention before I forget, she also has a workshop tomorrow, which I'm sure that you're aware of, but if you haven't signed up for that, there's still room. Excel at teaching. Tara's just a master at all of these things, and you will learn. And my philosophy is when I go to a workshop or I go to a conference, if I get one good idea, it was worth my time, because then that changes so many other things. But you will definitely find something worthwhile at many things tomorrow in Excel at teaching if that's of interest to you. I mean, we have a big group signed up for that as well, and we're back in this room. It does not start at 9 tomorrow, it starts at 10, so you can stay in bed a little bit longer if you're interested in that workshop. But help me welcome Tara.
Thank you, Joe. 30 years ago, I wrote a paper, a cost-benefit analysis of prisons, jails, and probation. I wanted to figure out if prison was worth the money, it cost 10 times as much as probation, for burglars in Maricopa County. I was keeping records of my time spent in those days, and I observed that I had spent 100 hours per page. I worked on nothing else for 3 years, no other research. For 3 years I was at a liberal arts school, mostly teaching. So I spent 100 hours per page. I thought it was finally time to share it with someone, so I sent it to 10 of the best-known experts in the world. 5 of them answered. They seemed to like it. I made the changes they suggested, and I sent it out for review. And this is what came back in red ink, half an inch high. You obviously didn't spend much time on this paper. I knew just what to do. I cried. But when I was done crying, I marched myself up to my office where I spent 4.5 hours, which was less than 0.5% of the time spent on the paper. I spent 4.5 hours making the changes the editor suggested exactly. I read the paper. Again, I thought it was much better. I sent it out to an equally good journal where it was accepted without revision. As in, yes, we'll take this, it's very good. I decided there must be a moral to the story, and in fact there are three. First of all, don't throw the baby out with the proverbial bathwater. Just because someone doesn't like your paper doesn't mean they don't have useful things to say about it. In fact, the two may be inversely related. The less they like it, the more useful things they may have to say about it. Second, don't write too long alone. I wrote way too long alone. I should have shared it with somebody, anybody, not necessarily the greatest experts, way before I did. Maybe after 2 hours or 10 hours a page, not 100. And third, I should have shared with less expert readers. I went straight to the top, and that's one good group of people to read for you, but it's not the only group or necessarily the best, because they read right past poor organization. This editor said this paper is horribly organized, but the experts never mentioned poor organization. I went back and looked. They didn't see it because they weren't reading to understand, they already understood. But when I tried to explain it to some random editor, he's like, hey, this is a mess. He couldn't make heads or tails of it because it was so poorly organized. As a writer, I went to the school you might be attending right now, the School of Hard Knocks. But it's not the only school, and it's definitely not the best. Much is known about how to become a prolific scholar, and anybody can. And that's what we'll be talking about today. Naturally, it's a 12-step program. Because writing is difficult, and writing well is a lifetime project. Steps break it down into little tiny units anybody can do, and they make it doable by breaking it down. And that's what we'll be talking about today. I mentioned there are 12 steps. The steps are in sets, and the first set is managing time, and that's the hardest step, so we'll start with that. The old swallow the frog first thing in the morning. The rest of the day will be easy. So here are the steps for managing time, and we'll start with differentiate the urgent from the important. What's the difference, you might say? The urgent is things that seem like they need to be done right now. The ringing phone, the beeping email, turn that beep off. The fewer times you're interrupted, the more you'll get done. And that little floating message is just the worst. It interrupts you every time. So things that are urgent are the ringing phone, the beeping email, the knocking door, that sort of thing. Things that are important are things that move us closer to our goals. And these don't always have deadlines and people attached to them. There are things like scholarly journal articles with no deadline, especially a single authored scholarly article. No other people associated with it, no deadlines. Deadly, because they often don't get done at all. They get pushed back with all the urgent things that have people and deadlines associated with them. So we're going to try to create a sense of urgency around our writing, because urgent things get done. So in effect, we're going to try to create a deadline around our writing, not the kind of deadlines that make you sick and keep you up all night and end up in writing papers on the plane, not that kind of deadline. The little tiny deadlines that are doable, and by following the little tiny deadlines, you get the great big important projects that move you closer to your goals done. The way we're going to do that is write 15 to 30 minutes daily. You may think you can't get anything done in 15 to 30 minutes. That's because you didn't write yesterday. The first day may take more time, but after that, your subconscious will work on your writing for 24 hours and no more. So if you wrote on Monday, you'll be ready to write on Tuesday, and you'll be able to make use of your time. You may think you don't have even 15 minutes a day to write. I think that comes from placing too low a priority on writing. I've been at a liberal arts school. I know that teaching is the first priority, and yet most of us can find 15 minutes a day to write by rearranging how we do things, particularly how we do email. I mentioned turning the floating email sign off. If you will check your email fewer times a day, you will spend less time on it. So if you're checking it every minute, try checking it every other minute. The less often you check it, the less total time. So people who say, I'm going to check email from 4 to 5 do the best because they're done in an hour because they want to go home. Those of us who do it as it comes in do the worst. I tell myself that, look, I have 3 things to do in a day: teaching, scholarship, and service. And each of them deserves some of my time, even though only 2 of them have a lot of deadlines and people involved. So I try to do my writing first before, and I don't spend all day on it, because if I did, I wouldn't be a good teacher and public servant. But I try to do a little bit of writing first thing every day. To do so, you've got to stop the interruptions. Most notably email, but also other interruptions. I have trouble with internal interruptions, little ideas that float across my brain like thaw chicken for dinner, rescue son from daycare. I write them on a little sticky note next to me that I will attend to you, I really will, but not in the next 15 minutes. Then, for the external interruptions, I post a sign on my door, whether at home or at work. The most important part of this sign is right here, where it says not never, just not right now. So you say, you know, I'm going to do 15 to 30 minutes of writing, 15 to 30 minutes of research, perhaps following your writing, but I can't be bothered right now. I find if I get to work early, I can have a whole hour of private time. If I get to work late, the students are already there. But if I come early, I find I can get a lot done. So, unplug your telephone, lock your door, tell the baby to go away or grow up, do whatever it takes. But find 15 to 30 minutes a day to write. Our careers depend on it. They really do. Now you might be wondering, how much will I get done if I write daily? A lot more than you would get done if you didn't. How much more? Well, this is a study by Robert Boyce, and then I'll talk about a study I just completed that's coming out to improve the academy, by the way, this fall. Yes, I'm happy. So pages written or revised per year. This group wrote occasionally in big blocks of time. They produced a whopping 17 pages of prose. This is after hearing a workshop by the great Robert Boyce, the guru of scholarly writing, who wrote 4 books and dozens of articles on the subject. They heard a lecture from him where he talked about the importance of writing daily, and then they went home, and that year they produced 17 pages using their old system of writing occasionally in big blocks of time. So there was another group, and they listened to Bob Boyce, and they also decided, instead of deciding to just listen and go home and do it the old way, they decided to make a change. They wrote daily and recorded it, but these records were a private thing between them and God. They produced 64 pages of prose. But the group you want to be in is the group that wrote daily, recorded it, and held themselves accountable to someone else for doing so. Because this group produced 157 pages. Now that's written or revised, so you could revise a page once, so divide by 2. It's about 80 pages of new prose and 80 pages of revised prose. So this group of writers was what he called near blocked writers. That is, they weren't very prolific. And he went around and handpicked them on his campus and said, "Say, you're not doing very well, so I will help you if you come to my program." I didn't want to do that for obvious reasons. I wasn't about to tell people you're not doing well, so let me help you. So I just did an all-call, kind of like what you saw this week, for an invitation to the whole campus to come. And my people were not near blocks, so without any help from me, they were producing 107 pages of written or revised prose a year. So they were fairly prolific. So we thought, well, how will it work with group that's more prolific? So we did 2 interventions. We had them come together once a week to read each other's writing and give feedback. And we had them email their group every day, like Frank would write Nicole and Daphne, and they would write Frank every day, 15, 20, whatever number of minutes you produced. You would put it in the heading of your email, the subject, so they didn't even have to open the email. But if you wanted them to open it because you'd reflected on your writing, you could write 15-see below. So with those 2 interventions, how many pages of prose do you suppose these folks who were writing or revising 107 pages a year without any help from me were able to write? 500. Whoa, you're an optimist. A mere 290. All right, so it makes a difference for writers who are near block, that is, who are not producing much of anything, and it makes a difference for writers who are producing a great deal. So you might be wondering, why doesn't every scholar keep records? I'm convinced there are at least 3 reasons. First of all, it's rudimentary. I'm a scholar after all. I tell myself, look, Hemingway kept records. Many great writers kept records. If it's good enough for Hemingway, it's good enough for me. What counts? Well, I mentioned research and writing are different. The one thing about research is it need not be done every day. This is like data collection, literature review, interviewing subjects, writing surveys, and that sort of thing. That bench work. None of that has to be done every day. You can do that whenever you feel like it. You can research all summer and write out of it all year. That's fine. But the writing, some amount of writing should be done every day. And finally, people may be confused about how to record. So there's a page, you've got it open, page 5? Yes, page 5 shows you one way to keep records of your writing. And what I like about page 5 is it asks you questions about how well you wrote in other ways besides just the minutes. It asks you, how many days did you write? Did you do other parts of the 12 steps? So there's a worksheet on page 4 and 5, I believe. No, 5 and 6. And that says 5 and 6, so it's right. Okay, there's a workshop on page 5 and 6, and I'll give you a few minutes to talk in pairs, as is pictured up here. Find one person to talk to, or at the most 3 if your table has an odd number. And talk about those questions, and then we'll talk as a group. Okay. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap 2 times. Thank you. Okay, so what things that are good to give up could you give up 15 minutes of to write a day? What things could you sacrifice part of? Not the whole enchilada, just part of them. Sleep, no. Bob Boyce studied that, and he found that the people who tried to give up sleep failed because they would rather sleep than write. But the people who adjusted when they went to bed and when they got up had success. The people who went to bed 15 minutes earlier and got up 15 minutes earlier had success. So think about that. What else could we give up 15 minutes of besides sleep?
Reading news on the internet.
Reading news on the internet. I love it. We could just trim it. We don't have to sacrifice it altogether. What else?
Favorite TV show.
Favorite TV show. Oh, I hate to think of sacrificing things outside of work. I was thinking mostly of things 8 to 5. How about reading our email less often? That's huge. We could even be more efficient as we work on teaching and service sometimes. Bob Boyce studied young professors, and he found that the most successful first-year professors, these professors were in the top 6% according to their peers, their administrators, and their students. So they were getting rave reviews from all three. They were in the top 6%. They spent less time by half than the average professor in their first year. And you're thinking, how could they do that? And I was thinking that too, because I was feeling betrayed when I was reading this study. And the way they did it was they went into class with a few note cards, 3 main ideas and a bunch of examples. And they had a lot of interaction with their students. In contrast, the typical first-year professor goes in with, umpteen PowerPoint slides with detailed lines on each one, and the students left wondering, so what was that point again? And the students from the other, he called them exemplars, came in with a clear idea, or left class with a clear idea of what they were supposed to know and what supporting material there was for it. So sometimes less can be more. It's just something to entertain if you're spending inordinate amounts of time on your teaching. Usually I think better teaching takes more time, but there are exceptions where people are spending inordinate amounts of time on too many PowerPoint slides. Okay, so think about, is everything you're doing more important than 15 minutes of writing? I mean, this is one of the trinity of things that we have to do for our careers. Really, is everything more important than 15 minutes of writing besides email? No, it's not. So think carefully about how you spend each 15-minute block and figure out which one you can sacrifice. Another way to do it is just to do your writing first, and it'll crowd something out, right? That's another strategy. So what questions do you have or comments about writing every day? And what benefits? Let's do benefits first. What are the benefits that come to people who write every day? Yes?
I think one of the great lessons that my dissertation chair taught me was the psychological effect of writing every day. Because I would spend a week not being able to find those 15 minutes a day, and then by the end of the week I was depressed and discouraged and sometimes really feeling like I'm never going to finish. And then she really worked with me in small increments. Today you have to grade 50 papers, you want half time, but if you first thing write 15 minutes. She said sometimes just shuffle your papers, go through your files, but put 15 to 20 minutes. And it was amazing because at the end of the week then I would feel fine, I feel much better, I feel accomplished and encouraged to start the following week. So it's just also a psychological incentive.
Yes.
Rather than being so upset because I couldn't find that block of 8 hours,
right.
Just anchor down, which even I don't think would ever be possible, not in my life. But 15, 20 minutes, then I would be encouraged and ready for the next week.
Good. Thank you.
And I finished.
Yes.
I think the key is that it keeps this thing that you're working on in the forefront of your mind, so that throughout the day you're able to grab things to attach to it, to feed on. I've had this idea for something I wanted to write for the past year, and I have a toddler, and I'm an adjunct, and I have 2 other jobs, and so trying to find time to sit down for a chunk. And we were just talking about it. I think the world of academia has this sort of push through, you know, the 2 months of the semester, and it's kind of a cramming mentality, and so we often go about trying to find this big chunk of time to do everything, and we lose our sleep over it. And this daily concept is such a great idea, just like doing a devotional or anything else. That if you build it into your life in little increments, I can get my little guy watching Sesame Street for a few minutes, and having the deadline of this workshop actually made me spend 15 minutes on Friday, 15 minutes on Monday to get something out, and it was brilliant. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yes.
So mine is more of a question. When you say 15 minutes a day of writing, I mean, as 15 to 30, are you saying, I guess, what do you mean by writing? So
Good.
So is it the same project every time, or ideas for different projects, or?
I should have defined writing. Writing can be as simple as writing like you're writing in a journal. Gee, I don't know what to write about. Well, I have these 3 ideas. Maybe I could write about this. And then I would encourage you to write a couple of pages about it. Maybe I could write about that, a couple more pages. Not all in 15 minutes, but picking, you know, kind of outlining, I want to talk about these 3 things, and then when you start the next day, you can pick one of them and start writing several paragraphs on them. So it can be very informal, or it can be a paragraph in a paper that's going to be published if you're further along on your idea. But it can be any kind of fingers to keyboard, because when we get ideas anchored to a page, we can go back to those ideas and ratchet up our standards for them, revise them and edit them and improve them. In contrast, when we have them floating around our head unanchored, they don't improve much over time, or they may not, for some people, improve much over time.
Yeah, this is very consistent with one of the courses that I've had the pleasure of teaching, and it deals with the subject of personal values and your goals associated with life. A lot of it is floating in the head, but until you put it to paper and you advertise it to others, there is no commitment to it.
Right.
And similarly, what you're discussing here, and it was interesting what you just said about the subject that you're going to write about, that it can be anything. But it's establishing a daily discipline that gets you into a regimen so that when you strike on a subject, you now already have the discipline in place to execute.
That's
great.
good. Yes, that's true. It's the same thing you're teaching. Yeah. You have the system ready to execute. Yes.
I had a question that hadn't even struck me until I heard what I think was Carol's question over there. I write in a really, I don't know, I've never seen a field that footnotes as much as biblical studies does. We have, my dissertation has had just slightly fewer words in the footnotes than it did in the body of the text. Like I said here, you're dealing with 2,000 years of material that you have to be aware of. So it's just really, it's technical. And I don't know, have you, as you're talking about like writing momentum and whatnot, I've always run up to this question of like, if I come to a place where I know I need to footnote information and do like a kind of, you know, a word study or whatever it's going to be in the footnote, is it better to do it while my brain is on the topic, or in your studies of writing, do people do better to like footnote, make a note of what it is, continue with the flow of their big thought, and then come fill it in? Do you have any sense of like what?
Yeah, your big thought and then come fill it in.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's the consensus, or not the consensus, that's the majority view of people who write about writing, is to keep the main flow going and then come back in and put in the statistics you need. I like to leave little blanks in my writing, and I'll talk about this in a minute, but I'll talk about it more, but statistic needed here, opposing point of view needed here, citation needed here, and then come back and fill that in as research rather than as writing.
Yeah, because that's the part, when you separate research from writing, I'm like, oh, I don't quite know how, I don't know how to do that.
It's not particularly easy, but It's important because you want your 15 minutes to be forward motion of your main text if you're at an advanced level and you're doing main text as opposed to journal. But even with journaling, you want to keep the main ideas flowing rather than getting lost in a footnote, for example. Yes?
A cool trick for bookmarking when you need to add things back is if you put QK there and then put your note, because QK doesn't really occur in language. So then you can control F and find all your QKs in the document later and know where you need to add things.
Yeah, that's probably easier than hunting for underlines, but they kind of stand out too.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Does it matter if it's a paper, pencil, or pen, or using a computer? And if you're using a computer, what do you just type it through Word or some other format?
I just type through Word. I use the computer, but they say we learn better. There's recent research that says we learn better if we write by hand. So if you're in the habit of write by hand, don't give it up. It's not a waste of time to have to go through your handwriting and then type it. It's not at all a waste of time, according to what experts are telling us. But if you're just hooked into your computer like I am, I mean, my whole desk is set up for my computer. I do write on my computer. But I think it's even better to write by hand if you have legible handwriting.
Sometimes it depends on what it is that I'm writing. So if it's a personal essay or poetry, I have to write by hand. But if it's a research-oriented essay, I'm in literature, but a lot of it's historically based, then it's on my computer.
Then it's on your computer, so it depends for her. Okay. All right. Well, it's your choice to make, but I would encourage you to entertain. A lot of people say, oh, it won't work for me. Well, try it for 2 weeks and see how it works. It won't work the first day because you didn't write yesterday. It may not work the second or third day, but if you give it 14 days, my guess is you'll find it working in your life. So, you're writing every day, and now you want to write efficiently. What did I do with my clicker? Here it is. All right, you want to write efficiently, and that brings us to our writing steps. To write efficiently, you want to write from the first day of your research project. Just like when you announce a paper in class, wouldn't it be great if everybody went home and jotted down a few notes about what they were going to do every day until it was due instead of writing it the night before? Write informally from what you feel and know. Write what Babs calls a 0th draft. This is before a first draft. It's like a grant proposal. You write the paper as if you knew the results. And then you can change things from it was more to it was less much easier than you can draft the whole thing when you get done with your research. Tell yourself that although you've been taught the literature review should be finished first, it should really be streamlined, not finished. The literature review is never finished. The more you read, the more they write. The more you read, the more they write. It's an endless loop. So read as you write and write as you read. Research as you write and write as you research. Because the same thing could be said about research. It's never really done. You can always do one more T statistic, right? You can always analyze the data in a different way. So neither is ever done. So you want to write as you're going. And by writing as you're going, you sharpen your research as it's occurring, rather than waiting for it to be done and wishing you'd done something. It's a way of helping to analyze what you're doing and make sure it's the right thing. Step 5, post your thesis on the wall and write to it. I used to literally post them on my printer, but now I think a better way is to put it in your footnote, in your footer of your paper. By putting it in the footer, you're faced with your thesis every page. And you're constantly confronted is my, am I talking about my thesis now? If not, why not? I either need to adjust the thesis or adjust the paper so that I'm talking about the same thing. Writing without a thesis is like shooting without a target. You never know where you're going to end up. You need a point, either thesis, research questions, hypothesis, something that you're pointing at. On page 7, I've given you some sample theses. These greatly sharpen the in this paper we approach to thesis writing. In this paper we is okay because it alerts the reader there's a thesis coming. But a better way is shown on page 7. Kind of thesis paragraphs are sharper than in this paper we. I have had amazing effects using these thesis statements with undergrads. If you have them turn in nothing but this, just this, and you analyze it for them and say, not that, this, not this, that, then when the paper comes in, it's a lot sharper. If you're interested in that, I have handouts on how to do that with students. Just email me. Step 6. Organize your paper around a template. There are templates for papers, probably shown on page 8, though that doesn't say. Is it page 8? Yes. Page 8. I'll make a note to get that on the slide. Those are okay, and you can use them to derive templates from a paper like yours. So when I'm writing about a certain subject, I find another paper that's about that same subject, and I make a template using this list, but maybe in a different order, to match what the paper similar to mine is doing. And that gives me a fill-in-the-blank approach to writing the paper. And not only do you like it better, but reviewers, editors, and readers like it better when they know where to find what, when it's in a standard template. The creativity comes within the template more than the actual template. The template itself is pretty fixed in academe, but what you do within it can be very creative. And if you need to change a template, you can change it any time. It just gives you something to work from rather than the blank page. Questions or comments on writing? Yes?
I come from a different sort of background. I'm in the communications and theater department.
Oh, uh-huh.
My research has to do with communication within the theater training and occupation. So I'm wondering where I might find a template that would allow me, because it's a different type of scholarly.
Right, it's not a quantitative maybe. You would find it in an article similar to yours. Do you have a favorite article?
No.
Oh, not yet? Well, keep reading till you do, and then use one of those favorite articles to shape how you write. Yeah, your point's well taken. This is for quantitative work primarily. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments before we talk about revising, which takes far longer than writing? Yes?
I'm assuming the approach is agnostic to the topic. So if you're doing a research where you have data, there's analysis that needs to be done to support, that would be different than writing, let's say, a case study.
Right, very different. And if you were writing a case study, you would need to get a case study to model it after.
Okay.
Or it might be wise to get, I won't say need, but it might be wise to get a case study to model it after. Yeah, good. Okay, revising, where we spend most of our time. It may sound remedial, but every paragraph needs a topic or a key sentence, and we need to remember to check for those. It's hard because we would like to assume they're all there, but they're not. John Bean, the greatest expert, American expert on student writing, says that when he reads colleagues' writing, the thing he corrects the most often is the need for a key sentence or a topic sentence. You might be asking, what is a key or topic sentence? A topic sentence announces the topic. A key sentence announces the point. You want to write point to point to point rather than topic to topic to topic. It's the difference between saying, I'm going to talk about the nutritional values of apples and oranges, and saying, the nutritional value of an orange is superior to that of an apple. You want to write as much as you can with points, so thus the term key sentences. You want to place your key sentence early in the paragraph. This is all on page 8, I believe, or might be page 9. Yeah, page 9. I don't know what's wrong with my little key here. Early in the paragraph, simply with little detail and without trying to prove the point. You've got the rest of the paragraph to do that. So you're not trying to prove it, you're just asserting your point. It's broad enough to cover everything in the paragraph, but no broader. You want to use key words as subjects. So instead of saying he was a powerful man and a short one too, you want to say Napoleon was a short man and a powerful one too. Here are some instructions for the next handout. It's a little different than what you've been doing for handouts. Next to each paragraph, write the number of the best available key sentence. Don't expect perfection. These are just random paragraphs. They are not good, necessarily good paragraphs. If the paragraph has absolutely no key sentence whatever, write 0 and then write and insert what you wish they'd said as a key sentence. And finally, discuss in your same pair or trio that you've been working with. So take a few minutes and identify those key sentences and then discuss with your pair or trio.
And there are 5 examples to choose from here.
Oh, you do them all. There's 5 and you do them all. Yeah. Okay, let's come back together.
So the whole,
Let's take a look at these. So in paragraph 1, oh, you don't have that one? Do you have by definition? Boy, I have done a lousy job of syncing these with new work. Okay, example 2. Which sentence is key by show of fingers? 1, 2, or 3? I see a 1 and no other answers. A 5, a 2, a 3, a 3, a 1, and a 0. A bunch of 3s. Who wants to speak up on behalf of your fingers? Anybody? How about a 3 speaking up?
Well, we have 3 different answers about this paragraph. So I say it's 3 because we don't know what the Brennan approach is yet, and so everything else in the paragraph goes into explaining what that is or why it was used.
Okay, so once they land on the Brennan approach, they stick with it.
Right.
Okay, I agree with you. I think it was number 3. It's a hard paragraph. That's why our answers were all over the place. It's not a reading test, it's a writing test. You should write clearly enough that people can see what the point is. But in this paragraph, it's what I call an abstract paragraph, even though it was not an abstract in the paper. The true value of each of the unknown variance parameters must be positive. So they're saying in theory it must be positive. They should have written a paragraph about that. Why does the theory say it's positive? Then the next sentence, however, in practice, it's sometimes negative. Again, a paragraph, please. Why is it sometimes negative? There are many ways to handle this. A paragraph. What ways? What other ways could you handle negative estimates that occur in practice when the theory says there are none? Then, in this study, we're going to use the Brennan approach, and they actually stick with it, as Chris said, once they announce it. So that's 3, but it's a tough paragraph. A lot of our paragraphs are tough, the ones we write as well as these. How about this one? The United States is at present the world's largest exporter. What number do you think was key?
Well, that's number 4.
Oh, that's number 4. Okay, let's go to number 4.
We have one about rock samples.
Oh, rock samples. Do you want to hear about rock samples?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just talk to you about rock samples. What did you do with this paragraph? You split it into 2, okay? And then you have 2 key sentences. You want to tell us when you split it, Jimmy? Where you split it?
After the dater, everything after the dater
would be a new paragraph. As a dater,
to the dater they are everything.
to the dater they are everything. Okay, you could split it there, and that will make a fine 2-paragraph sample. I have replaced that example with cancer, but not very well. All right, how about the United States? Number 4 on yours. Number 3? Any other finger votes? 1, 2, or 3? I see a 0, a 3, a 1, a 2, a 3, a 3. And Joe says it's 3. Why do you say that, Joe?
Because it is. Because everything else explains that sentence.
Everything else explains that sentence. The beginning talks about how big it is, and then more on how big it is in the second sentence, and then it switches the tone to how important it is, and it does stick with that thereafter. But there's another good answer. What's the other good answer besides 3?
Without excellence, government.
4 is an example of 3. All those things should be numbered. Since they started with numbering, they should say first it's this, second it's this, third it's this, fourth it's this. But another good answer would be 0, and that would be because it doesn't have, if you wanted to take the approach that this paragraph needs a sentence that ties the 2 together, that says it's both big and important. You could have a sentence like that at the top. So you could say this is a 0 paragraph because it doesn't include the first idea, or you could say that first idea is working as a transition. It's impossible to know since we haven't seen the previous paragraph. How about 7 out of 8 rains? 1, 2, or 3. I see a 0, a 1, a 1, a 1, a 0. If you wrote 0, what did you write in its stead, and where did you put it?
At the beginning, I wrote it as a question, but I said, secession is foundational to the stability of a monarchy, but is heredity or merit the best determinant?
Wow, that's very good. Okay, so it's not about palace revolt and popular revolution, it's about, in a word, succession to the throne. So here's what Williams and Cologne did. They got rid of palace revolt and popular revolution. They said that takes you nowhere. It's not about that. They got rid of that, and they wrote after Peter the Great died, 7 out of 8 reigns were plagued by what's at stake? Turmoil over disputed succession to the throne. Just as every key sentence, every paragraph needs a key sentence, every section needs a key sentence too, and of course the whole paper needs a key sentence. We call that the thesis. So sometimes you can have two key sentences in a paragraph. One that's working as a section key or the whole paper key, and one that's working as the key to the paragraph. You see this most commonly at the end of the intro, where many disciplines write the thesis at the end of the intro, the very last sentence of the intro. But at the first sentence of that paragraph or early in that paragraph, there's often a key sentence for the paragraph rather than a key sentence for the paper. So if they're working in different ways, one's a key for a paragraph and one's a key for the section or the whole paper, that's fine. But most of the time when you see two key sentences in one paragraph, what do you need?
2 paragraphs.
2 paragraphs. Or to dump an idea. Yeah. Dump an idea or write another paragraph.
We were observing that in many of these, that we were not able to identify, because we had not seen the thesis, we have to infer what the thesis is,
Yeah.
and we may or may not be able to do that clearly to base our decisions on.
That's true. And you'll be able to base your decisions better this afternoon or later this morning, excuse me, when you work on your own paragraphs, because you'll see the rest of the section, and that'll help. Yeah. Yes?
I don't know if you mentioned this. Do you ever write these sort of key sentences as a way to start outlining?
It's a wonderful way to start. 25% of academic writers outline first in a serious way, meaning they follow their outline when they write. And if you're one of those 25%, by all means, write your key sentences first. It's better than writing a couple of words to have a whole fleshed out sentence. It's a very good way to outline. It's just that most of us dump it all on paper and clean it up later, rather than writing so carefully by an outline. But if you can, that's a great way to write. Robert Boyce says it's better, Peter Elbow says it worse, so just do whatever you feel. Keys make excellent outlines. They make excellent outlines because they're in the paper for the reader, so the reader gets to see the skeleton of your work as well as you seeing it. I used to write outlines in a separate document from my paper, and the outlines in some ways were better than the paper. They were clearer and simpler and to the point. But what we're going to do is we're going to identify a key sentence in each paragraph of a section of something you've written, and then pull those out and make an outline so you can see the skeleton separate from the paper. If you leave your skeleton in the paper only, what happens to me is as I'm reading key sentence to key sentence, I start reading the whole paragraph. But if I can isolate it, I can see just the skeleton, and it's very, very helpful. On page, I hope it's on page, let me look up which page it's on. There's an example, 11, thank you. There's an example paragraph or page of key sentences. I'll give you just a second to skim those so you know what you're trying to create. So take a second and skim page 11. Okay, so that's what you're going to be aiming for. If you would look up here, I'm only going to teach one thing that's hard today, and it's this. And all the notes you'll need are taken for you very carefully in a later page of the handout. But if you look at that page, you're going to miss the main idea, which is going to be shown on the screens graphically. So please look up and see how this is done. So to make your list of key sentences, you read backwards rather than forwards. And the reason you read backwards is you can keep your focus paragraph by paragraph backwards. And as you read paragraph by paragraph backwards, you identify that red, blue, orange, and green key sentence. Then you make a list of those in another document. Then you read that. If we stopped here, you'd be looking only at the microscope version of key sentences like we did a minute ago. So you'd be looking at just each paragraph under a microscope and examining it for a key, and we want to see the big picture. So we want to get away from the microscope and into the 30,000-foot view. So you've got your list of key sentences. So you now ask yourself, as you read them backwards, you ask yourself, does everyone contribute to your purpose or your thesis, which is prominently posted in the footer of your paper here in black. You can't see it, but it's there. So you ask yourself, is each of these really tied to my main point, my purpose? If it's not, you say, oops, the red one wasn't. You voted off the island. Now you've got 3 sentences to read forward. This time you're looking for organization. Are they organized? And in this case, they weren't in a good order. The orange and blue were in a poor order, so they had to change. Now you revise your paper to reflect the changes you made in your keys. So you say, well, the red one was voted off the island, so the paragraph probably doesn't belong either. Off it goes. If this is emotional for you to vote things off the island, put them in a special place. I call mine the graveyard, where things can rise again from the dead and be born if necessary. And then remember, the red and the blue were out of order, so now those paragraphs are probably out of order too. Now you reread your paper to check your work. Was that all an improvement? Usually it's a nice improvement. It really picks up your paper. So are there questions before I turn you loose on the page that demonstrates how to do this? Tells you line by line how to do it. You can probably do about 5 or, let's see, what time is it? You've got until 11:15, so you could probably do 7. A typical person would probably be able to do 7 paragraphs and do all of this to about 7 paragraphs. Maybe 10, but this is a little long for 1 hour. It's a little much to produce. Questions on the strategy? It's given on page 12. It's not on page 12. Nope. It's not in here. You just heard it, but oh my goodness. I don't know if I sent you an old, I've done a lot of work on Publish, can you tell, this summer. And I don't know if I sent you an old handout or what I've done. But something bad, Joe. I apologize. Okay, it's in your head. If you have questions, ask me and I'll come to you and I'll help you. I'll be here for you this whole time, and you've got until 11:15 to try to follow those steps on
our own work.
On your own work.
Did the colors have any significance?
Pardon?
When you labeled them in
No.
colors, it was just a differentiator.
Yeah. Okay, let's close our laptops and we'll proceed with the rest of the workshop. How was that? Did you see some things that needed to change? Yeah? Good. It really helps me when I'm working on stuff. It's called reverse outlining by some people. I call it after the fact outlining, but you write first and you outline later, or you outline first and you outline later. But always after you write, you outline. start. Yeah. One of the ways I like to use this list is in a structured abstract. That's an abstract where you write these 5 words and write a sentence after each of them. You eventually eliminate, in most disciplines, you eliminate the 5 words. But you write a sentence to each of these 5 words. And there have been a lot of studies done on structured abstracts versus just writing from your heart. And these come out ahead on every measure if you take the time to just write kind of an answer to each of those prompts. It really helps abstracts. Okay, the next set of steps is on getting help. It may sound dreadful, but it's really not, because when we share things pre-review, we don't wait for review, we just share them earlier. We get feedback from people who we know who they are, and they're kinder than people behind a blind review screen. Step 9, learn how to listen. Why would we want to listen? Because on 33 out of 34 measures, papers were shown to improve after review. So papers get better when we listen. That's why we want to listen. Peter Elbow tells us to listen the way an owl eats a mouse. He trusts his organism to take in what's good, make use of what's good, and get rid of what isn't. And that's how we listen to feedback. We take it all in. We use encouraging words to say more about that. What did you mean by that? How could I best do that? All that encouragement rather than no or but words. We tend to be the worst readers of our own stuff. We're uncritical in important ways and critical sometimes in unimportant ways. So what we want to do, instead of being our only reader, is we want to share with others and have them read for us. I recommend that you share drafts of your work with 3 groups of readers: non-experts, anybody outside your discipline; experts, anybody inside your major discipline, like sociology; and capital E experts, anyone you cite the most often or the most heavily, or both. You might say, isn't that going to take a lot of time? Actually, it's faster because you get a finite number of criticisms, you respond to those criticisms, and you're done with it. A typical reviewer has about 9 criticisms, so you know you're getting a good review if you get about 9 criticisms. If you ask, how does this look, and they say it looks good, you know you got a bad review because there's nothing there. So in a 12-month project, I would work alone for about 3 months, just talking to myself. And then the next 3 months, I would share with non-experts, just people close to me, not necessarily even in my same discipline. The next 3 months with people in my discipline, and the final 3 months with people I probably don't even know, capital E experts. People I cold call on to ask, and I'll talk about each of these in turn. Non-experts, I like to ask, what 2 places could the paper be clearer, more persuasive, or better organized? So they're going to give you about 6 answers, 2 for each. What should be clearer, more persuasive, or better organized? By asking questions like that, you get answers rather than getting, oh, it looks good. Non-experts experts you can treat like non-experts or like capital E experts, depending on how well you know them, how far along your paper is, how close they are to your discipline. Capital E experts, I send an email to them, and it has several elements. And let's see what page it's on before I shout it out.
Or 12.
12, thank you. I'm still trying to get there, but yeah, 12. So I write at least a couple of capital E experts because only half of them answer me. So you gotta try 2 or 3 before you get one answer. I do it all at the same time. I send to all of them. The paper is ready for publication in my mind, but I want to know if they see things I haven't seen. They always do. So I tell them how their work informed mine in my email, how I benefited from their work, and I talk to them about the intersection of my work and theirs. Maybe what's different, or what was especially helpful, or whatever. Then I ask what couple of articles should I read that I haven't. This way I can avoid embarrassment at the review stage, something really obvious that just came out that maybe I didn't see. I ask what journal should I send it to, even though most experts encourage you to pick a target journal before you write. Even though you've picked a journal that you're planning to send to, I still ask, what journal would you send this to? It serves a couple of purposes. It may broaden my range of possible journals, so if I get rejected at my target journal, it gives me a second choice. Or maybe it's a better idea than my first target journal, so it might replace where I go. And finally, it tells me how good they think it is, because I can study the journal and see what quality of journal it is, and that shows me their evaluation on my paper. I ask for a quick read. I say, just run your eyes over it and tell me the biggest problems you see. I'm not asking for a careful read with copious comments. And finally, I volunteer to read for them. Joe Williams at the University of Chicago taught me this years ago. I wrote to him when I was very young, "Dear Dr. Williams, I am nobody and nothing, I am nowhere at, Dear Dr. Williams, I am nothing and nowhere, and I'm in Nowheresville," and so on and so forth. And I wrote to him and I said, "Would you please read my first article in writing," which was brazen, I must admit. And he wrote back, "Sure, if you'll read 3 chapters of my latest book as enclosed." It taught me an important lesson. Just as he's an important part of my audience, he's my capital E expert, I'm an important part of his audience. I'm his non-expert. I don't even have a degree in rhetoric. You also want to remember your friends as well as your enemies when you pick readers. When I was very young, I wrote a paper called "Are Labor Economics Textbooks Sexist?" And I concluded they were deeply and profoundly sexist. And I was thumbing through my Rolodex in those days, looking for addresses and thinking, now who am I going to send this to? And it occurred to me to send it to all the men, they were all men, who had written the 12 books that existed in that time on labor economics. So I changed the locks on my door, I unlisted my phone, and I read my mail. Well, collectively they wrote 26 pages of single-spaced criticism of my paper. Let's just say they didn't like it as a summary statement. So I took those 26 pages of single-spaced criticisms because I didn't agree with them. I just saw that they expressed a good point of view for why they had done what they did. So I changed the paper to say, you might ask this, I would say this. You might have this concern, I would respond this. That paper was accepted without revision. They just took it. They took it because it was a good paper when those men got done with it. When it started, it was such a poor paper, it would have been kicked completely out of the park. But by the time those guys got done with it, it was a good paper because I was talking to somebody besides myself. Similarly, the man that told me I had obviously not spent enough time on the paper, he was my enemy. He did not like the way I write. He said it was too terse and it was too convoluted, poorly organized. So, unfortunately for me, he was the editor of the journal that I most wanted to publish in my life. I sent him everything I wrote for 10 years. He rejected all of them. But he responded with copious comments to each one within 10 days. Was he my enemy? Or was he my friend? For one paper you're working on now, jot down 3 people you could ask to read in each category. Include your enemies. Okay. I want to take just a minute to thank Dr. Clemens, Joe, and Gail, who put this all together. Gail was here very early this morning, working. Joe has been corresponding with me for months. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you. I want to thank the university, which paid for you to have memberships in Text and Academic Authors, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. And I want to thank Text and Academic Authors who paid my fee and my travel to come to San Diego. Text and Academic Authors is a nonprofit 501c3 devoted to keeping you from dying with a book or an article in you. They're having their conference in Santa Fe in 2 weeks. It's going to be a great conference. They have every expert from everywhere coming in for that. And it's wonderful, but they can bring benefits to you at your home campus even if you can't go to the conference in a year. My favorite benefit is their newsletter that has articles in it like how to develop a daily writing habit. Stuff like that keeps me writing as I get into slumps and I read those things that kind of picks me up. They also have $1,000 grants. They're post-publication grants. So after you publish something, you can send the article in and fill out the application that says, hey, I spent $1,000 going to Washington, D.C. to use their library. Can I get reimbursed? And it's somewhat competitive, but not very. Then they'll send you up to $1,000, whatever your receipts showed that you spent. So that's one thing they do. If you join today, which is free for 1 year, you get the book Publish and Flourish. Text and Academics Authors provides that book to you. And it's a little tricky to join. One page is a little tricky, the other page is easy. But the back side, if you turn around to the back side, I'll walk you through this. It's in the blue folder, I believe. Or it's blue on one side and white on the other, so it looks either like this or like this, front and back. The form inside looks like this. This is what you're looking for. And you want to be on the back that has no color. Okay, so suppose if you look there at 12 and 13, suppose you have published, suppose you had published something in a textbook that was electronic, you would mark 12. And if you had published something in a textbook that was print, you would mark 13, but this person hasn't published either, so they leave them both blank. They have, however, published a scholarly book or a journal article. So we mark 14 for this person, and they've published in both electronic and print. So because there's something blue marked, either 12 or 14 marked, you mark 10. And because there's either 13 or 15 marked, you mark 11. Anything blue makes you mark electronic at the top. Anything yellow makes you mark print at the top. Whether or not you marked anything, you sign this. If you want to join, which we hope you will. And when you're done filling it out, Gail or I will come around and give you a book and exchange it for your membership form.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Okay, step 11. These are the polish and publish steps. And step 11 is read your prose out loud. How many of you read your prose out loud before you send it off? Wonderful. Why do you do that? Any particular reason?
See if it makes sense.
See if it makes sense. Yes.
I do it so that I can hear my voice and any errors or mistakes, whether they're grammatical or in my thinking.
Yes, yes. It gives you a different lens to hear from, doesn't it? Yeah, good.
Consistency of voice.
Consistency of voice. And I read it to see where I run out of breath, because then I know I've gone on too long. Before sending your paper out for review, I recommend you read it paragraph by paragraph. Yes, backwards. I recommend you read it like this, and the reason is you're trying to hear it with a new lens, and you'll hear it with a very new lens if you read it paragraph by paragraph backwards. I would check as you go backwards now just for grammar, wording, the little stuff now, because you've come a long way. You did the big stuff when you did the organization piece, and now you're looking for the little stuff. So you read it paragraph by paragraph backwards, and then you double check it, reading it one more time forwards. Out loud is wonderful because it gives you this whole new way of hearing or seeing your work. Step 12, kick it out the door and make them say no. You've written it. Trusted colleagues have read it. It's time to kick it out the door. But you say, it's not done, it could be better, it's not yet finished. That's true today, it will be true tomorrow, it will be true 100 years from now. What's actually interfering is three things: pride, perfectionism, and fear of rejection. Instead of fearing rejection, plan for it. Always keep 3 journals on your list, the names of 3 journals on your list, no matter how many times you are rejected. I once had a paper rejected 7 times. But it was no problem, because when the first one was rejected, I added one to the list. When the second one was rejected, and so on and so forth till 7 rejections. Ironically, it's the only thing I wrote that ever had a wide audience. It was Publish and Flourish. It was rejected 7 times. Now, I look back at that article and say it was a poor article. It was, you know, my first inkling of what Publish and Flourish would be. But it was a pretty good idea, and yet it got rejected 7 times. So persist would be my suggestion. Select appropriate journals by reading your references and seeing what you're citing, or what you're citing, what you've read, looking at where they published it. Ask little e and capital E experts where you should publish. They may have ideas even better than your own. And query the editors. You might ask, what is querying? Querying is asking an editor if they would be interested in your work. And you query, pages again, page 15 at the bottom. You query editors by emailing them the title and the abstract of your paper, attaching the whole paper and explaining this is not a submission, because it will irritate them if they think you're trying to sneak around their laborious database that is how you're supposed to send them the paper. So it's not a submission, it's just a query. To what extent does this paper fit the direction you are taking the journal? That's the most important question. Because if they don't want it for their vision of the paper, you're not going to get in. Yes. To what extent does this paper fit the direction you are taking the journal? Because most papers get an accept, a reject, and a revise and resubmit, right? And if you get a mixed review like that, the editor is going to make the decision. So just try to find out what the editor is going to do up front so you can save yourself in the social sciences and humanities months of waiting. In the sciences, it's a little faster. I've had scientists say it's so fast, why not just submit the article? Which is fine if it's that fast in your discipline.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So I do less submissions in like creative writing areas.
Mm-hmm.
If you attach something to a query, they'll kick it back. They won't even open it.
Oh,
But in
okay.
academic circles, you're allowed to do that?
Yes.
Okay, that's good to know.
If you don't want, if you're not allowed in certain circles to attach, then don't.
Okay.
Yeah, by all means don't. But in academic circles, you are allowed to attach. Some people recommend against it, saying they're not going to read it anyway. I once had somebody at our premier journal read the paper, comment on it copiously. I made those changes and she accepted it. So that's why I attach it. But it won't offend me if none of you attach it if you don't want to. But they might read it. There's a long odds that they'll read it. Wait 2 weeks and write again. Maybe they missed the first one. Wait another week and cut the journal from your list. Every journal has bottlenecks. It's called slow reviewers. It's an occasional thing that affects an occasional paper. But if you've got a slow editor, it affects every single paper. If they can't even tell you they don't take queries, some journals don't. If they can't even tell you they don't take queries, in 3 weeks with 2 reminders, you know you've got a journal you don't want to work with. If, however, they reject your paper, thank them profusely. In the social sciences and humanities, they've saved you months of waiting, and for the same bad outcome. Because if they'll tell you up front they're not taking it, they're not taking it, trust me. If they tell you they might take it, they still may not take it. Like if the reviewers don't come back good, if the reviews don't come back good. Thank them profusely for 2 reasons. First of all, you may want to publish there again. And secondly, they've done you a great favor by saving you lots of time. And that's what I tell them is, oh, thank you for being honest with me. This was not too painful because I queried. I got 7 negative answers in 5 weeks of querying. The book would have come out before the article if I had not queried. Because in my field, you wait 3 to 6 months. So if I waited 6 months for each of those, the book would have been out. The article would have been lost forever. Okay, pride. Pride also interferes. We've got to celebrate, revise, and resubmits, which is hard to do when you get 9 criticisms from each person on average, and there's 3 reviewers. That's 27 criticisms of your baby. It's hard to take. Why should we respond to it positively? Because in education, journals have a 15% chance of acceptance with further revisions, as in, thank you, we'll take this, but you need to make these changes before review. And on a revise and resubmit, you have 75% chance of acceptance with yet further revisions. So you move from a pile where you had hardly any chance to a pile where you have every chance. So that's why we should celebrate, revise, and resubmit. The cardinal sin of academic publishing is to fail to revise and resubmit. And editors at the conferences I go to, editors gripe endlessly about all the revise and resubmits, all the effort they went to give all this feedback, and so on and so forth, and they never got the article back. They say in the old days, when I was attending those at disciplinary conferences, they would say they had file cabinets full of revise and resubmits that never came back. Yep. Most people do not respond positively. They either put it in a drawer and forget it, or they put it in another journal. They just can't without making the changes, probably. Ouch. Perfectionism is the final one that you've got to beat down. You've written it. Trusted scholars have read it. It's time to kick it out the door, but you say it's not done, it's not finished, so on and so forth. Artists are encouraged not to overpaint a picture and bury a good idea in a muddy mess. And so it is with scholars. We've got to find a balance between making it better and getting it done. It reminds me of an old song. You've got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them up into an envelope and mail them away, know when to walk away and know when to run to your mailbox. You never doubt your writing while you're sitting at the table. There'll be time enough for doubting when the writing's done. Seriously. Don't worry. Reviewers are not known for being overkind. Your job is to write it and mail it. The reviewer's job is to tell you if you will embarrass yourself publicly. You've done your job, so make them do theirs. Just kick it out the door and make them say yes. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Tara. That was awesome. We have lunch for everyone. One of CTL's learning outcomes is building community. And so we try and give you opportunities to spend time together. We've already been doing some of that, and we get to hang out with Tara some more. So if you have questions for her, she's going to be around for lunch as well. So lunch is out there. You can sit out there or bring your food back in here. And let's just thank Tara one more time.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.